Good morning and welcome to Alive and Thriving. Super excited to have you here. Today we're going to be reading from chapter 7 of book 3 from Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. A little snafu in yesterday's title card. It was chapter 6 that I read yesterday, not chapter 5. And in recent news here in the United States, Daniel Radcliffe, the former director of national intelligence, announced on Maria Bartiromo's show Monday or Tuesday that UFOs are real and that they detect so many of them every single year that they can't possibly disclose an accurate number. That there are seismic or whatever type of sensors they have across the planet, and that under his 4 years under President Trump, they detected so many UFO anomalies every single year that there's no possible way that some of them could not be from other planets. That is huge news, and yet it's not getting very much traction across the United States, so I thought I would mention it here. Without further ado, let us jump into Chapter 7 of Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East. After a short period of rest, as the first rays of the sun came up over the distant horizon, the Mooney stood up and said, "With me there are those who have learned many things which the Father sees for humanity. They see with the comprehension of that which penetrates spirit. Thus, the whole wide world comes under their vision. They see that which humanity feels. Thus, they are able to assist humanity in fulfilling its desires. They also hear thousands of sounds, usually inaudible, like the song of a hummingbird, the sounds made by the newly hatched robin, the notes of the field cricket, some of which sing at 15,000 vibrations a second, and many other musical sounds far above the range of the human ear. They are also able to feel, control, and send out inaudible sounds that are capable of producing types of emotional feelings such as love, peace, harmony, and perfection that benefits the whole world." And I'm not sure to which extent he's referring to here, but if you've ever been in the presence of a Reiki practitioner, you have experienced certain subtle vibrations emanating from their body, from the universe through their body into you. The practice of Reiki is the practice of becoming a channel for cosmic energy, which is all healing, all good, that then flows into the recipient or the patient's body, and they are able to benefit health-wise from that, whether it's mental health, physical health, emotional health. That is an example of the type of human being that they are talking about here in this first opening chapter. The vibrations of the feelings of abundance and great joy can also be amplified and sent out by them so that they surround and interpenetrate all humanity to such an extent that, if he will, each unit of the human family may have them. When this condition is acknowledged to exist, each human unit cooperates by amplifying and sending out these vibrations. Then, the very thing that humanity is in need of is crystallized into form around or among its units as of people. Their desires are accomplished. When the necessary vibrations are set into activity, the units of humanity cannot escape the actual presence of spirit, if we define it as spirit. Thus, you can see how the physical body is limited. And here, he's talking about Lynn McTaggart's work, which is known to humanity since probably the time of the Buddha, if not before then. But whenever multiple people gather and set their intentions upon a unified vibration or a unified intention, like healing cancer in somebody or doing something like generating more business for someone's business or healing a broken heart, whenever 8 people consciously direct their intention to that end, meaning let's say 9 people are together and 8 people set their intention to heal one person's broken heart. that person will be the recipient of vibrations of healing amplified eightfold. And when you are together in a group of 8, as Lynn McTaggart has scientifically documented, you will experience some phenomena. And she's conducted this experiment on plants, human beings, and remote locations. So plants that are set like in a Russian laboratory, and then she conducts her experiment in like Singapore with a group of 8 people or larger sometimes, and they are able to actually measure the effects of the intention, vibration, on these recipients, plants or people. So it's a profound effect, and it's why Jesus said, "Whenever 2 or more are gathered in thy name, there I am also." That is real, and you can take advantage of it today. Spirit not only penetrates every atom of the so-called physical, it also interpenetrates the minutest part of all substance, whether it be solid or gaseous. In fact, it is the force in which the mold is wrought that substance takes its various patterns from. In no other way can substance take its various forms. Man is the only projector and coordinator of these various patterns that substance assumes. Allow me to digress for a brief moment of explanation. You see, the great central sun of our universe blazing forth in all its magnificent splendor, and as the horizon gradually withdraws and exposes to our view a new day, a new epoch, a new Easter is born. This so-called universe of ours that rotates around the central sun is but one of 91 such universes that rotate around a central sun. And they're not talking here about the sun of our solar system. I hope that was clear by central sun of the universe. They're talking about a much larger, if you will, sun that would be like at the center of the Milky Way. But I believe in this case, they're talking about an even larger sun that the entire Milky Way gravitates around. All right, this so-called universe of ours rotates around the central sun, is but one of 91 such universes that rotate around a central sun. So it may be much larger. It may be the Milky Way plus all of the other galaxies that rotate around a central sun, and then they call that a universe. And then that universe could be in its own like self-contained sphere, if you will, for analogy's sake or visualization's sake. And then that is rotating around a central sun. That's pretty powerful stuff. They say 91 such universes rotate around a central sun. This sun is 91,000 times larger than the whole or combined mass of all the 91 universes. This central sun is so colossal that each of the 91 universes, rotating around it in perfect order and sequence, is as small in comparison as the minutest particles that spin around the central sun or nucleus of an atom, as you call it. So they're essentially calling our universe the size of a nucleus, or an atom going around a nucleus in an atom, an electron going around a nucleus in an atom. It takes this universe over 26,800 years to accomplish one turn of its orbit around this great central sun, and that's where we are now. It moves in exact order with one complete precession of Polaris, or the North Star. Do you doubt there is a great positive divine power controlling all? Let us return to our observations, and I want to take a second here on this 26,800 year timeline. 2012, the Mayan calendar, it basically demarked the end of this 26,800 year cycle. And their calendar was such that it told, or it broke down into time periods, 5 of these 26,800 year time cycles. And that is inside the very center of the Aztec calendar, or the Mayan calendar. I believe it's the Aztec calendar. Correct me if I'm wrong, by all means. There are 5 faces, 4 of which face in profile or away from the person viewing the calendar, and the fifth face looks dead on out at you, and that's to indicate the epoch or new Easter that we are in now that began in 2012. This epoch is one in which the divine being, the divine intelligence that's back of all things in the universe, is now looking directly at us. So it's indicative of the time when we are able to wake up and view ourselves as we really are. Spirit incarnate, one with the infinite source of life. Look closely. A picture is forming, and on the film is the white globular disc of the sun. A spot of red is forming on the white disc. Now look more closely and you will see that a tiny point of pure white light has flashed out from the red disc. This is not a beam of light. It is a running point of pure light. The spark of life emitted and included with that which is to be born. It is but a tiny point of light to you, yet it is huge to those who can view it at close range. How strange it seems to you. In a very short space of time, you will be looking through an instrument that assists your eye to see all of these things. This will also reveal to humanity many more wonders. And they're talking about telescopes, bigger, more powerful ones than just what Galileo had brought to the scene. For millions of ages, the great central sun has drawn to itself the throbbing, pulsating, yet harmonious emanations of energy which must give forth of itself or burst asunder. Energy is never created nor destroyed. Observe that a great nebulous gaseous mass has burst forth from the sun. You have observed in pictures the birth of the planet Neptune, which is now a great mass of microcosmic particles or atoms that have been ejected from the parent sun with great force and power. While it is nebulous and indistinct, the point of light that appeared before the final expulsion took place is the central sun that has the power to attract to itself and hold together even the minutest particles as well as those of larger dimensions that have been given forth from the parent sun. Your first thought is that an explosion has taken place and that particles of the sun have been shot into space. Stop a moment and observe what has really happened. Why do the particles and gases cling close together and form a definite circular pattern? Is it because of the intelligent law back of and guiding it in perfect order and harmony? This is proof that it is no accident, but is in perfect order and sequence governed by law that never fails. This point of light or central nucleus is the central spark or sun, S-O-N, the Christ of humanity around which all humanity revolves. This is determined spirit force. This law prevails throughout all units of humanity. The central spark is a point of pure white light, the Christ which penetrated the first cell. Then it expands, divides, and gives off that light to another cell, which is born of its division but held together by a coexisting and cohesive force, which is called love. These particles are nourished and held together just as the mother holds and nourishes the child. It is in reality a child of the sun, S-U-N, which contains within itself the nucleus of the central sun. That nucleus is the image and likeness of the parent that has just given it forth. As soon as it has come forth from the parent, this central sun has the power to draw to itself, consolidate, and hold the vibrant, emanating energy that surrounds it and which is necessary for its life and growth. It does finally consolidate the most extended orbit of our universe. It does finally consolidate the most extended orbit of our universe. So to recap just a little bit here, what they're talking about is they're basically talking about the births of planets, the births of anything really, in that you'll have a central point around which these cells are going to revolve, which is then going to help them take their form. And this central point is synonymous with love, and Christ is synonymous with love. So it is first from the All-Father, if you will, or the divine Mother-Father combined, that you get a planet, that you get a son or a daughter in your womb. And they're going to go into greater detail. No, they don't go into greater detail in this book series, but if you jump over to Martinez Cosmology, they talk specifically about why this process takes place. And it is because you have a masculine force in the form of a great central sun, a great ball of fire, if you will, a corona of energy, and it is being compressed on all sides at all times by space, which is its opposite in temperature. It's very cold. And when you get a cold pressing down on a hot for an extended period of time, like in the case of a planet and space, you eventually squeeze another combination out of the masculine entity. So, out of the masculine comes the seed into the womb of space, is surrounding the newly born sun, and then cared for is that planet or that sun, together by the gravitational pull of the parent sun and the all-encompassing embrace that is space. So even at the cosmic level, when we're talking about planets, we are talking about masculine, feminine energy, and we're talking about divine masculine and divine feminine energy. And in the middle, as the product of the two interacting with one another, you get the sun, S-O-N, or S-U-N. They don't really distinguish in this book between the two. They say that they're interchangeable because the same process which gives birth and forth a new planet or a new sun in a solar system is the same process that gives forth a new baby in the human realm. And the parent, and the animal realm, any mammals that reproduce physically, they go through the same, at the cosmic level in cosmic science, the same processes that do a new planet when being born. It's very, very cool. It's very, very hard to argue that divine intelligence is not back of all of this when you see such logical event like connections being made and events transpiring. When Neptune first came forth and the central sun began to draw energy to itself, mostly from its parent, the sun, the atom began to consolidate it into its form. That is, it began to shape itself into the pattern that was projected for it before its birth. It occupied what is known as the cradle orbit, the orbit within the orbit which Mercury occupies today. In this order, the child is able to draw its substance from the parent more successfully. It is much nearer to the parent. As it drew substance from its parent, it began to consolidate into form. Instead of remaining mere gaseous vapors in the nebulous state, the chemical elements began to segregate and consolidate. The resultant solids from the chemical action began to consolidate and rock structure began to form under intense heat and pressure. As this semi-liquid substance became more consolidated, it began to cool on the surface and a crust formed. This crust became heavier and more dense, both by the cooling process and by the assimilation of particles upon and adding them to the outside of the crust. When this crust became strong enough to hold the revolving mass together, this mass became the primary rock structure of the planet, with a semi-liquid molten mass at its center. Then, from the resultant gases and vapor, water began to appear as the product of the union of these gases. The nebula then became worthy of the name planet. It was now fast evolving toward a condition where it could sustain life, yet it must go on for eons of time, adding to its structure, particle by particle, from the outside. The continued cooling of the central mass brought it nearer and nearer to perfection before its atmospheric, chemical conditions, and surface were ready to bring forth life organisms and maintain those life organisms. At this juncture, the parent sun began to give birth to another atom. As this expulsion was completed, Uranus was born. The extra force emitted with the explosion threw Neptune out of its cradle or smaller orbit into a more extended one. It was compelled to take the orbit now occupied by Mercury to make room in the cradle orbit for the newborn child, Uranus, in order that it might receive its nourishment from the parent until its nebulous structure became a planet. Again, conditions settle down and go well for a long period of time. Neptune, the first child, is growing up and coming nearer to the conditions where it can support life. In fact, amoebic forms are appearing in its clouded brackish water or inland seas. And if you want to know why life originates in water, then you should go check out the Schumann resonance experiments. I wish I knew the name of the researchers and scientists who did this, but essentially it's when you expose water to the Schumann resonance of planet Earth, which I believe is 7.86 hertz, DNA forms in the water without, and the only two combinations are that emanating vibration, which is masculine in this case, even though it's the Schumann resonance is coming from a feminine planet, which is planet Earth. That's not entirely accurate either. Planets are more balanced in their masculinity and femininity than any other life forms walking their surface, but we can achieve that type of balance between our masculine and feminine poles here while we're alive, and in so doing, get closer to the benevolent nature of the planet, which then brings us closer to self-actualization. And self-actualization is to have these male and female energies or poles, P-O-L-E-S, in your body balanced. Now let that one sink in for a moment. Then another atom is ready to come forth and Saturn is born. The extra force given out at the time of the explosion sends Uranus out of the cradle orbit, and it also sends Neptune out of the orbit now occupied by the planet Venus. Neptune is now sufficiently cooled and its surface developed to a stage where it was able to support life. It was upon this planet, as it occupied this orbit, that the conditions for the support and nourishment of human life, which the Earth enjoys today, were brought to the stage where the human life element could attach itself to the select amoeba necessary for the support and manifestation of the human form. So you're getting like a different type of evolutionary model here than the history of how anthropomorphic form came to occupy our planet. But at the same time, you're getting, I should have said that a little bit more accurately. Without going into the history of the human race on planet Earth, there are two ways in which human beings came to exist on this planet. And the first way you just heard about here, where the human element could attach itself to the select amoeba necessary for the support and manifestation of the human form. So right there, what you're seeing is like consciousness begin to imprint itself on very basic life forms, amoeba, and then through the process of natural evolution that the planet will provide for its sentient life forms, the human form comes about. And maybe that is through primates over time. But there's another way that human beings can come to exist on a planet, and that is to be engineered by other human beings or other anthropomorphic life forms to be grown, if you will, whether in a womb or whether artificially, and then placed on the surface of the planet that has suitable conditions to support their life. Thus came into existence the first human race, not the animal amoeba, but the human amoeba. The amoeba of selective type and character, with intelligence that could and did shorten the process of evolution. Upon this planet, conditions were perfect for selective human development, and this development came on at a rapid pace. There were no lower animal organisms, thus animal life did not develop. The planet was occupied by superior human beings who rapidly developed into a perfect human race who were all able to supply and support themselves directly from cosmic or aqueous substance. Thus, they would have been termed gods upon this earth. Many of the legends and myth around today have their inception in and are built around this great people. They were exactly like the principle that brought them into existence. This race, through their ability to express beauty and perfection, began to surround themselves with perfect and beautiful conditions. In fact, they built the planet into a paradise of beauty and perfection. It was intended that this race should forever maintain this perfect condition, which they had accomplished by absolute control of all the elements. Thus, when they put forth a desire, it was fulfilled instantly. As time moved on, some began to evidence inactivity and selfishness in attempting to outdo their fellow man. This condition brought on divisions, and divisions brought on selfishness and greed, which caused dissensions. The time that should have been spent in creating for service and advancement was dissipated in strife and contention. Instead of holding closely to their source, they were differing and separating widely, until all but a few lost that which was high and noble. All but the few let go of their security and protection. This caused a vortex to gather around the planet. Instead of holding to the perfect patterns of the divine, whereby they could have accomplished a complete universe of divine attributes upon divine planets, they gave way to such an extent that when the next outburst occurred, it was so enormous that when the nebula was consolidated, the resulting planet was larger in mass than all of those which had previously came forth. Thus, the great planet Jupiter came forth. The excess energy given out was so gigantic that it swept Saturn out of the cradle orbit into the orbit now occupied by Mercury. The outburst was so tremendous and the solar system so filled that great quantities of asteroids formed, arrayed, and aligned themselves around Saturn. Being of a different polarity, they could not coalesce with Saturn. Thus, they were independent, and their only alternative was to align themselves around the planet Saturn as bands of asteroids. As such, they are commonly called the rings of Saturn. Some of these asteroids are as large as planets. Now think about that. That's pretty cool. They are talking about Saturn as having been the first planet in our solar system to develop human life, and that human life developed so in accordance with the divine principle that brought it forth that everything they did was in accordance with divine source. So they built up a paradise of divine beauty where their intentions were fulfilled instantaneously. Then a whole bunch of them started to get selfish and lazy in an attempt to outdo others in senses of accomplishment, which then changed the polarity of the planet over time from being service to others to service to self. So that when the planet Jupiter was born and it came from a complete service to others parent, being born inside a service to others universe, and the minor particles that were left over, I mean, not minor compared to, the asteroids that came out with Jupiter that did not coalesce to become part of Jupiter, they made their way over to Saturn's orbit, but because they were of a different polarity, service to others, Saturn did not absorb them. Rather, it kept them in orbit like a halo or like a life raft when you're in the water around you, a circular one. And that's pretty cool to think about how the polarities were the resultant cause of Saturn ending up with rings and not just being a planet like Earth or Jupiter without rings, all due to a difference in mental activity of the sentient life form on that planet, whether that mental activity is oriented towards service to self or service to others, plays a huge difference in the type of cosmic blessings that you will receive when natural cosmic forces take place. Pretty interesting. The force swept Neptune, the great and beautiful, out into the orbit now occupied by the Earth. All of its magnificence with its great inhabitants, save a few, were swept away. Those who were preserved had never let go of their divine heritage, and they had so constituted their bodies that they could seek safety in the emanations of the spirit sphere, which is all around and interpenetrates the 91 universes now in existence. In this condition, they have been able to preserve their identity and knowledge and give it out so that it will never pass out of existence. It is through and by these ideals that we live today. We claim kinship with these great ones. They compose the root race of humanity. By them, the ideals of humanity have been preserved and the Godhead of man has been maintained. Now, I want to draw a very distinct connection here, and it is we claim kinship with these great ones. They compose the root race of humanity. This is a benevolent faction of that race. Now, we just talked about a whole part of that race, or the majority of that race, becoming service unto self, and becoming egoistic then is the path that you go down. You become service to self. That service to self faction, you could say, would have been part of the coalition, if you will, of sentient life that contacted the Nazis and manipulated them into believing that in order for the planet to be better and for the Aryan race to become the stewards of the planet, as they saw it, the only worthy sentient life form on the planet, that all other races needed to be eliminated. And it is due to their idea, the Nazis, they had the idea that they had been told essentially by God, that this needed to take place. That in order for the second coming of Jesus, the master race needed to be established here on earth as the dominant and the only race in existence. And you see here that the masters are claiming kinship with these great ones because they compose the root race of humanity. Now, this race throughout time has been called the Anunnaki. It doesn't really matter at this point. We're going to get much more clarity on this going forward as a civilization. That's why I talked about the disclosure of UFOs at the beginning of the episode, because now is when we're going to start to get all of these pieces of the puzzle. And then when they open up the Vatican vaults, oh my Lanta, we are in for a frickin' surprise. The Great Awakening is truly here, and it is the most exciting time to be alive. With that said, service to others and service to self. They're drawing those distinctions if you read between the lines here. And these individuals, the masters of the Far East, are truly service unto others. They exist, their whole existence is in accordance with service to others. Everything they do is to help humanity raise our consciousness and become more loving. And if you look at what the Nazis were doing, they were not helping humanity raise their consciousness and become more loving, though that is what their propaganda was telling the world. And the swastika literally does mean to be awake. And the reason why the Germans chose that as their battle flag and their national flag is because they were flipping the bird, if you will, to the overall power structure that existed on the planet Earth to keep civilization at a certain technological level that kept them grounded on the planet. So when the Nazis came into contact with another sentient race, be it extraterrestrial, that said, we are the root of humanity and we are ready to come back and preside over this planet, but in order for us to do that, we must have a clean slate. And you are our hands and feet, soldiers. You must go out there and enact the final solution so that we may then come back. Now, of course, it was never going to work, and the whole entire exercise was one in failure. But they were able to achieve a great deal of suffering on the planet, and that, at the end of the day, if you meditate on the intentions of the sentient extraterrestrial life form telling the Nazis what to do, the end state, the end goal was to generate suffering. And if they could have taken over the world, they clearly would have. But empire and the generation of suffering. At the end of the day, any person that you identify as being someone that habitually creates suffering in the lives of others is somebody who you need to either avoid, or hopefully this little monologue that I just gave will give you a better understanding of where they're coming from. It's service to self. They want to create strife and suffering because it is in those times where they are unaffected by it while you're emotionally affected by it. And then they maneuver with greater ease to achieve their agenda because you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off emotionally and reacting and not focusing on what would ultimately bring out the best end result for you. Meanwhile, while you're running around like that, they are implementing their agenda because now the roof is on fire, but they're unaffected by it, right? So they can go about and focus and direct their attention while you are emotionally all over the place. All right. By them, they compose the root race of humanity. By them, the ideals of humanity have been preserved and the Godhead of man has been maintained. Then followed by many millions of eons of time needed for the nebula of Jupiter to take form as a planet, so enormous in its size that it has cooled but little even today. Time again passes on with swift wings, and the sun is ready to give birth to a fifth nebula, and Mars, the blood-red planet, is brought into existence. As this expulsion is complete, we see a phenomenon happening in mighty Jupiter. A huge red spot has suddenly developed on her side, and she is expelling a great portion of herself. She has given birth to a satellite, which is called a moon. There is such an excess of force set up as the two expulsions take place that the giant Jupiter is thrown out of the cradle orbit and room is made for the planet Mars. And as the giant Jupiter occupies its new orbit, the whirling nebulous form is in no way able to gather to itself the great mass of particles that were expelled at the time of its birth. These particles were so far flung that they came within the influence of Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Mars. But being of a different polarity, they could not be assimilated by those planets. They became separate asteroids without planetary polarity. Thus, they cannot take their place as planets and rotate in order and unison around the central sun. Consequently, they fly into space as vast swarms of meteors with no rhythm of movement, speeding with fearful velocity to collide with and embed themselves in the surface of other planets or to be torn to pieces through the impact of collision. Also, in their mad rush through space, minute particles are carried away until they will gradually return to the aqueous mass, where they can begin again, taken up and assimilated by the great central sun, to be given off again as nebula at the birth of another planet or atom. Now comes the outburst that gives birth to the nebula that finally forms our Earth. Mars is thrown out of the cradle orbit and our Earth takes its place. Thus, all of the planets are sent out into another orbit to give space for the new child. Then Venus is born. In like manner, the Earth and all other planets or atoms are thrown into ever-expanding orbits in order to make room in the cradle for the newborn planet or atom. Then Mercury is born, throwing the other planets or atoms into another widened orbit, making up the full complement of planets that are visible through astronomy today, 8 in all. There are really 9, as the cradle orbit is not occupied by Mercury. It is occupied by the last nebula or child, but that nebula has not consolidated into form so that it can be seen. It is there nevertheless, and its influence is felt. Thus, the universe that our Earth is a part of contains 9 planets or atoms with their 9 orbits, which they follow in the mathematical precision around the central sun or nucleus. You have been shown pictures of this creation as it came into being through orderly sequence. So there they made a distinction that our solar system they referred to as a universe. So our Milky Way galaxy would then be the central sun that they're talking about here, and they would be talking about our galaxy rotating around a central sun. And this has been my understanding via NASA science of how exactly our galaxy orbits around a central sun of the universe. And then there'd be more than 91 galaxies. But yeah, we'll keep going here. Something is happening to Neptune, the farthest removed planet from the sun, with the greatest orbit. It has reached maturity and also its limit in velocity. It has received its full light charge and is ready to come forth as a sun. It is going into decline as the new nebula begins to take form, and the sun is ready to give birth to the 10th nebula. Before this expulsion takes place, Neptune has reached its limiting velocity in its spin around the central sun. It flies into space and explodes, then returns again to the aqueous. There, it can again be taken up by the central sun to add more energy to that sun in order that more planets or atoms may come forth. In the universe of which our planet is a part, there can be but 9 planets or particles spinning around the central sun at one time. Thus, it is a constant round of birth, consolidation, then expansion, reaching the limiting velocity, flying off into space, exploding, disintegrating, then reassimilating by the sun in order to give forth new birth. Thus, the sun is reassembling from the aqueous that which it sends out to again become aqueous. It is a continuous renewal through regeneration into new birth. Were it not for this process, the great central sun of the 91 universes, as well as the central suns of the different universes, would have been consumed long ago, and all would have returned to the infinite in which all substances exist. A wise intelligence that pervades all emanations and space calls the universe into form and starts them on their onward march. The sun or central nucleus never grows old nor dies. It accepts, absorbs, holds, and consolidates, then gives birth to the new atom. Yet it never diminishes, as it is forever receiving and absorbing unto itself that which it is giving out. Thus, regeneration and rebirth are going on all the time. Universes are being formed, expanding, and returning that which they have received. There is one round of progression from a low to a high, then on to a higher attainment. The galaxy of 91 universes that our Earth and its galaxy of planets or atoms are one part of is but one galaxy in a still wider flung universe of 91 galaxies that revolve around a still greater central nucleus or sun that has a mass 91,000 times greater than the first galaxy mentioned. This condition goes on and repeats itself by 91 almost indefinitely. The whole making up the great and infinite cosmos, the galaxies that comprise the Milky Way as you call it, this cosmos is often called the atomic heat ray, the source of the sun's heat. This is not a cloud of stars in which your sun belongs. It is a nebula born or expelled from the great central sun or nucleus just mentioned. The sun, as you see it located in this nebula, is but a portion of the light rays from the sun. These particle rays are bent at an angle as they enter mass, then are reflected until these bent and distorted rays make up the image of the sun and place it in a false position. These rays are reflected back so distinctly that you think you are actually looking at the sun. In like manner, many other planets or atoms are distorted by this phenomenon. Where there seem many, there are few in comparison. Yet the total number of the actual is calculated in the many millions. By looking at the picture closely, you will see that these nebula and their suns are not disks but globular and round, flattened at the poles just as our Earth is flattened. In looking at them, you are only observing a great flattened polar area. The stupendous mass of the great cosmic sun exerts so profound an effect upon light rays that they are reflected completely around the cosmos. They are also definitely affected and reflected by coming into contact with the atomic or cosmic rays, and their particles are thrown out of place to such an extent that thousands of images of planets and stars are reflected from one collision. Thus, thousands of planets and stars appear to be misplaced, and many more thousands of the images are again reflected. When we look through the universe, the images show both sides, and we will see the light that which was released hundreds of millions of years before, which has made the complete round of the cosmos. Thus, we get two images instead of one. One image is of the planet as it was hundreds of thousands of years ago, while the other is as it was hundreds of millions of years ago. This follows through the whole great cosmic order. In many instances, we are actually looking at the great past as we also see into the great future by the same means. Now, in my attempt to visualize this while I'm reading it, what I am seeing is a circle, a band, if you will, like the orbit of a planet. And if we place the planet at one of its places in orbit, it's going to be moving in one direction and it's going to be having come from another direction. And the direction that it has come from, that's the past, obviously, in this analogy. And the direction that it's going, that's the future. Now, if we think about that orbit as being a tube of light, you could either look into the future and see everything that's to come, or you could look into the past and see everything that has come. But either way, when you look forward or whether you look backwards, you're looking into the same tube. So you're ultimately looking at the same thing. Like past becomes future, future becomes past. History repeats itself, all of these things. So as you're looking into this tube that goes into the future, you're seeing the future, but you're also seeing the past simultaneously because it comes full circle, like your vision. If your vision was like a light ray that bent around on the inside of the tube and came all the way to the backside of your head, if you will, as that orbital path goes, analogy goes, then whether you're looking forward or whether you're looking backwards, you're looking at the same thing. You're just looking at it through a different perspective. That was what kind of visually came to mind as I read through that portion there. There is an invisible connection, like the thought or heart impulse amplified billions of cycles through which spiritual orders go forth, that controls all of the universes. These great throbbing impulses or heart throbs go out through the intelligence which pervades the aqueous that surrounds the cosmos, which is its spiritual counterpart. It is these gigantic heart throbs that send the life currents into every atom of the complete cosmos and keep them moving in perfect order and rhythm. In this infinite cosmos vastness, there can be no sick or discordant cells, as one sick or discordant cell would throw all out of unison. Then for a time, chaos would result. This also pertains to the human organism when disturbed by discordant thought. So they're talking about a universe in which light needs to move or vibration needs to move. And this vibration is perfect. Therefore, it's not going to come into contact with anything imperfect because it pervades all things. It is moving at a constant, steady rhythm. And anything that gets in the way of that rhythm is put right, is moved to where it will not be discordant with the vibration that is all around it, coming from the great central intelligence. It is this way with your body. When some cell is not in harmony with the universal life force, and then you consciously or subconsciously block the pure vibrations of that central intelligence to enter your body at will throughout every single day, every single moment of every single day, then that diseased, discordant vibration is going to gather around it like vibration, which is going to magnify or multiply at the cellular level. And then you get a cancer cell or a tumor. In so doing, we recreate the process that cannot happen out, in the cosmic level. All these planets, they're not like amassing to one another and becoming a cancer cell or a cancer tumor that then flies around inside of breaks its orbital rotation, and then like Jupiter comes flying at the Earth. It doesn't happen that way inside the solar system, but it does happen that way inside of our bodies. And that's why we need to be so careful about the thoughts that we think, especially first thing in the morning and last before bed, because those thoughts have the power to draw to themselves anything. And if those thoughts are thoughts that are blocking, keeping out positive thoughts, then you're going to be holding within yourself negative thoughts. And then those negative thoughts can become toxic, and they can result in dis-ease. That's how all dis-ease comes about. It starts in the thinking realm and then manifests in the physical realm. It's also how all beautiful things come to be. They start in the thinking realm, and then you manifest them in the physical realm through action, and sometimes through non-action. Think about that one for a second. All right, so it was from this central control that the term Godhead was evolved. The heartbeat of the human unit corresponds to the heart throb, although in miniature. Man is from and is counterpart of the intelligence, which has control of the whole aqueous source. He is coexistent with the source and draws all direct from the great aqueous reservoir, just as the great central sun draws from that source, but in greater degree because of his union with the greater intelligence which is directing the source. Man, the unit of humanity, is a well-organized divine universe, though infinitesimal compared with the great whole of the universes, yet man, as the unit of humanity, when he assumes and takes actual charge of his divinity, is most necessary, as he is of the great intelligence that is before and in control of the whole divine plan of all the universes. Thus, should all the universes be destroyed, man, in complete cooperation with primal intelligence which interpenetrates and pervades all emanations in the aqueous, as well as down to the lowliest physical forms, starting with light emanation, could rebuild all of the universes. Should such a catastrophe occur, man not only has the power, but is the power that does resolve himself back into primal intelligence, wherein there is no destruction. When quiet again reigns and harmony is restored, it matters not to man, when he is back into primal intelligence, how many billions of ages pass to bring about primal perfection in order that the whole process may be started over again. Here, man maintains oneness with infinity and can afford to wait until the time is ripe for the bringing forth of the universes. Then, with the preserved consciousness of former experiences, he is better equipped to assist in the bringing forth of a more perfect and lasting condition. In this, man can never fail, as he is more definite than any other form, and failure is not written in his horizon or in his consciousness. The infinitesimal becomes the infinite of all forms. When the wise sage says, "I am deathless, ageless, eternal, there is not a thing in life or light that I am not," he is looking into and sees this vista. This is true divinity, and the ascension is truly his. And I'm going to read that one more time. The infinitesimal becomes the infinite of all forms when the wise sage says, "I am deathless, I am ageless and eternal. There is not a thing in light or in life that I am not." When he says this, when the sage says this, he is looking into and sees this vista, the vista of eternity. And this is true divinity. The ascension, then, is truly his. Get yours. All right, everybody, that's some pretty powerful stuff right there. Anyone who dares to so boldly proclaim that they are deathless and that not a single thing in light or in life is other than that which they are, the I am principle, is someone who truly steps up to the mantle and claims their divinity. Then the ascension is truly theirs. And that is what this entire channel is about. It is ascension preparation, if you will. I subscribe to a very specific scientific model as put forth by NASA, as recorded by David Wilcock, Corey Good, Dr. Emery Smith, and others, Greg Bradenton. And it is essentially that we are fast approaching a cosmic event, a solar system event in the physical that is going to have a profound effect on our consciousness, that which exists in the non-physical. And it's going to be because of immense energies that are going to be released by the planet. Maybe this is the energy release that the masters are talking about here, giving birth to another form, then expelling Neptune off into outer orbit so that it can then once again realign, reassemble, recoalesce with the great central sun of the cosmos. Now, when that takes place, those who have done the work, those who have prepared, those who have risen their consciousness to be 51% loving, meaning that your thoughts 51% of the time are positive, uplifting, and service to others oriented, then the ascension is yours. And you can take greater advantage of it by increasing the quote-unquote percentage by which your thoughts and actions are service to others oriented. The higher of a service to others oriented disposition you have, the, I would say, more profound the ascension level event will be for you. I cannot confirm that, but that is my heart's intuition on this subject. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Please subscribe. Please smash that like button. When you do, it forces the YouTube algorithms to push the channel out to other would-be viewers so that they may get the opportunity to hear this beautiful message by Bear T. Spalding, interpreted by yours truly, Nathaniel J. Namaste. Have a wonderful weekend.